Wow, we have a great conversation today with Dr. Shannon Shea and Joseph Veneziano, all about a article that they wrote in Behavior Analysis in Practice, which is a really wonderful publication. As a BCBA, I love reading that publication. I feel like it's very easy to digest. It's very timely topics. And I go sleuthing in the journals, both ASHA and from the BCBA part of my world, because I know that as a treating clinician, it is very hard to stay in touch with research and just what is being written out in the field. They together actually met in a journal club, which I love, at a bar, which is even better because I love having drinks with friends and I love talking about nerdy stuff. And they like all those things too. We try to recreate that journal club here at the ABA Speech Connection, our membership. We're trying to do journal article courses every single month because I really feel like for more intermediate topics, topics that are more timely, really getting into the research, it's nice to be able to look at these articles. And hey, who doesn't want to get some CEUs that way as well? So they wrote an article together, I think during the pandemic is maybe when it started, it sound like. And this article is called They Have a Voice, Are We Listening? In this article, they discuss a lot of things. They talk about the seminal Lovaas article from 1987. If you're new to what that means, we talk about that in this show. And they also talk about kind of critically analyzing the field and what we're working on and how can we help support our students and our clients and how can we go forward with empathy and cultural humility. We all want to be ethical. We all want to have empathy for the clients that we're supporting. That's why we got into this field. I'm very excited for this conversation today. Let's get right on into this one.
You're listening to Autism Outreach Podcast, a podcast full of ready-to-use strategies to help those with autism strengthen their communication skills. Here's your host, Rose Griffin of ABA Speech, a speech therapist and board-certified behavior analyst who shares tips you can use in your next therapy session.
Welcome to the show. I'm excited about our episode today. We have with us Dr. Shannon Shea and Joseph Veneziano. Thank you so much for joining us and coming on to the show.
Thanks for having us. We're excited.
Thank you for having us.
I was sleuthing articles in Behavior Analysis and Practice, one of my very favorite publications. And I came across an article that you wrote, and I had to have you guys on. And thank you so much for responding to my email. I always appreciate that. And so you wrote this really cool article called They Have a Voice, Are We Listening? And kudos just to the title because it was a good hook. You know, from a marketing standpoint, I was like, I'm reading this and I think I know what we're talking about here and I'm doing it. As somebody who's always trying to get people to watch my short form videos on Instagram and TikTok and all the LinkedIn and conference talks, I really appreciated that kind of snazzy title, but with a very important message inside. So could each of you just kind of tell us a little bit about you, kind of your journey into the field and what you're up to now for work?
Sure. So about the title, it's a really funny story because we really equally did everything. We were trying to figure out who should be first author and everything. And I was like, Joe, you came up with the title. And he's like, I don't think I did. I was like, I'm really bad at writing. I was surprised that I wrote it because I'm usually
you came up
really,
with the title.
really bad at naming things in a snazzy way. I was like, there's no way I came up with that. It's too good. It must have been you.
That was yours. That was your title.
It's so profound. But you wrote the article first, then you came up with the title. Is that how you did it?
Yes.
Okay, because that's usually what I do. For my conference talks and proposals and things like that, I do the talk and then I get, you get at the feeling, right? And it's good. So love that. Okay.
So I'll try to condense because my career has been long. I have a master's in mental health counseling from Nova Southeastern in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. I worked as a behavior analyst in foster care. I was actually the first graduate from Nova's ABA program, not because I'm special, and I'm not even sure they know that, but because they introduced it at the end of my master's degree. And I was like, that sounds cool. So I just added the classes on when I was kind of already done. So I just finished first accidentally. And then I worked in foster care at ChildNet, a different foster care agency, went up to upstate New York, supervised 7 BCBA students that were doing FIT classes at a residential treatment center. It was pretty old school. Some of it was horrifying. They still had the padded rooms with the magnetic lock doors where you're using facilitated communication and stuff. But that's all sorted now, not happening. And then I moved to Massachusetts. I was clinical director at a smaller agency for adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Got my PhD at Endicott and became clinical director of VinFin, which is a very large agency for adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities.
Oh, okay.
And I started a journal club, and that's how Joe and I met. Like 10 years ago, I started the journal club at a bar.
Oh my gosh. Love it.
Take it away, Joe.
Oh my gosh. Wait, so where you work now, does Dr. Corey, I always say his name wrong, Whalen, does he work there? Or am I making that up? He's a speech therapist in BCBA. Maybe he works somewhere different. Somebody I had on the podcast before.
Oh, I forgot to be current. In 2020, I moved to Florida because I was afraid to be alone during the pandemic, and my family's here. So now I've started a VCS sequence at Kaiser University. So it's a BCABA program right now. I'm writing the master's level, which for spring 25 should be available. The BCABA program, the bachelor's level, is at 3 campuses so far. So I'm working on it, trying to make it like really good. But it's very cool because I got to like write my own degree program, which is kind of the dream if you're a nerd, you know?
Well, PhD. I mean, I love that. Okay, so wait, are you back in Florida now? Is that where you're?
Yes.
Okay. Oh, wonderful. Okay, we're thinking about doing FABA. I'm starting to do more in-person talks and get a booth with some other BCBAs. So, okay, maybe we'll meet in person. Oh, I love that. Okay, awesome. Okay, Joe, tell us a little bit about you.
Okay, so my career isn't as expansive as Shannon's at this point in time. I kind of fell into ABA a little by accident. When I was doing my undergrad at Grinnell College, I really wanted to do something that was autism related. Grinnell is a small private liberal arts college, so very research focused, very research oriented. So a lot of my focus in undergrad was really cognitive neuroscience and how that related to autism. And during that time, I discovered the concept of neurodiversity. And that's something that really stuck with me. And it really helped me to start really questioning research paradigms and who research is for and what gets studied and just the political aspects of research in general. So I really started reading the works of autistic self-advocates to build a greater understanding of disability and really get a better taste of medical versus social models of disability. Right. So really discovering those things led me into reading about some of the concerns that the self-advocate community has about ABA. Right. So graduated from Grinnell in 2012, took a gap year, and then went into UMass Lowell's Autism Studies program. And the thing that I really liked about that is that it wasn't straight ABA. At that time, even though I was going through the course sequence, I had actually no intention on becoming a practicing BCBA, which is funny enough. I know I get my BCBA. I graduated in 2015. And I've been working with adults with autism and other developmental disabilities for the past 8 years. And in fall of 2022, I've actually went back to UMass Lowell for my doctorate, and I'm currently in my 4th semester of my doctorate in applied psychology and prevention science. So I'm kind of combining behavior analysis with a lot of other fields because I can't sit still, figuratively or literally, and basically, so I'm still focusing on like ethics and behavior analysis, but I'm also focusing on the intersection of autistic and queer identities and epistemic violence and how it relates to what gets researched and in autism research in general.
Oh, it's so interesting. I love that you're diving into these topics and doing so important to ask these questions, right? A lot of us don't ask these questions, or, treating BCBAs often are just, now with insurance coverage, we're just so busy and our caseloads, I'm a speech therapist and BCBA, I feel like a lot of speech therapists are always slammed with their caseloads, ever growing, the paperwork, the meetings. But it's interesting to be, because I've been a BCBA for 12 years and a speech therapist for 20. And man, the field has just changed so much just from the scale of it and some of the things I see, like BCBAs, because we're an ACE provider. So I see BCBAs, which I've never seen before, asking in Facebook groups like, hey, does anybody know of any free CEUs when it's like, 10 years ago, we would have been like, oh, we want the best CEUs. We want like you said, nerdiest, like we really want to dig in. And makes you nervous, right? The analysis is kind of it's diluted a bit, but that's why it's cool to have these conversations. So you wrote this amazing article that I really thought was interesting in Behavior Analysis and Practice. And if you haven't looked into that, is a really nice publication. I feel like it's very digestible, and I just think it's really relevant and timely, the topics in there. So it's called They Have a Voice. Are we listening? Can one of you or both of you tell us why you wrote this article?
Well, to go back to the bar and journal club,
Yes.
I didn't know Joe very well because he had started working for the clinical director at New Path, was part of the journal club from like the very beginning, and he was working with that person. So he joined a journal club because it's great for new clinicians to do a journal club and just like expand on all of that. So we got to know each other a little bit. We were chit-chatting, and like I was very into Joseph Catula's literature, if you're like around long enough to even recognize the name, because he was wonderful. But he did have like some conversion therapy with like covert sensitization and stuff. And I had mentioned to Joe that like it's crazy that we invented that, and that BCBAs, like if I say it, they're like, you're out of your mind. No, we didn't. If we did such a thing, I would know about it. And they get combative. And Joe was the first person who was like, yes, right. It's horrible. We're both like, we need to write this up so that like people are aware of this. Cause like, if you make a mistake that big, happens in medicine, it happens in any helping profession, but you have to like own it, examine it, and prevent it from happening again. So it was something both of us had a really strong desire to write about for like years. And then we kind of found each other. And when the lockdown happened, I think we both finally had the time, honestly, to sit down and write it. So.
Oh, interesting. Well, I think some people don't understand our history because I teach an ethics class here at Kent State, and I've done that since the class started. And sometimes I'll just say like, Dr. Carbone, or, like everyone knows who Dr. Hanley is, but like I've been around long enough too that I just feel like not everybody knows everybody that I know in the field. And I feel like we need a slideshow, and this is Dr. Iwata, and he's very important. And like, I just feel like those things are important to the field, and maybe I'm old school in that, but I feel like you guys kind of feel that way too. So, it's interesting. And were you going to say something, Joe? I'm sorry.
Right. So, the impetus of this paper actually came up in 2011. I was doing an internship in DC, and I was really into just LGBT politics and hearing about some salacious things that have occurred. So there was this Anderson Cooper segment on the Sissy Boy experiment. And at that time, I really didn't have the best knowledge about ABA, but it's just they're going through and they're just like, this sounds like ABA, this sounds like ABA, and talking about what this researcher is doing. And they were using the word indistinguishable. And then they pan out to the title, the title in Java, and how it had Riekers and Lovaas there in the title. So, I knew the connection with Lovaas, and I'm like, holy crap. How is nobody talking about this? And going through my master's program, nobody was speaking about these issues, and no one was speaking about how this concept has really formed a lot of just the early ABA, and how it continues in some cases as well. And just not having those discussions was something that I felt was really, really missing within master's curricula. So, one of my points writing the paper was to get this into master's curricula and get future clinicians informed about some of these missteps and these issues that the field has had, so they're not repeated.
Yeah, exactly. We were both passionate about it. It was just like because we finally found each other. Yes,
I love the idea of the journal club. I think that's really cool. The one thing that's so different with speech versus BCBAs, I feel like, when I would go at one time, I went to ABAI one time, but it's like you go up to the bar and it's like, oh my gosh, there's Dr. Sundberg, and there's all my favorite people. And it's small enough where you can talk to everybody, but it's casual and it is kind of nerdy. And I do like that kind of atmosphere of wanting to learn. But no, I think you're so right, Joe. Like we don't talk about these things. And I teach that ethics class. So we talk about, some of the scandals that have happened, and, we use the Bailey and Birch text, but I think just kind of bringing these things up. And I do think because the field is growing, that everybody obviously is going to have different opinions about things. And so that's one thing I think is so sad about our field, though, is that I feel like there's such a division in the field just with some of these topics that have come up, recently. It's just, some days I'm like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? You know what I mean? Because I'm a speech therapist who talks about ABA online. So sometimes I'm not popular unless I'm in a room of BCBAs, and then everybody's like, "Oh, wow, you're a unicorn." Okay, so sometimes I need that. I'm hitting up all the ABA conferences. So in your article, though, you discussed the seminal Lovaas article from 1987, and some people may not be familiar with that. Can you just give us a summary of that article and really the implications of that in the field?
So I can, and if I forget anything, Joe can pop in because he remembers details better than I do. But basically that article, the goal of it was to make these kids normal, right? They can join kindergarten, be mainstreamed, or was it first grade? It doesn't matter. Graduate. And the big to do was that 9 out of, I think, 19 of them were indistinguishable. They blended right in, their IQ went up, which I think is an artifact of them being able to take the test. I don't think they actually got smarter, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yep.
So it was these huge results, but the point of it was to teach them to mask mostly, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was get rid of stimming. The indistinguishability was the point.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the same as the point of conversion therapy. Our critics say that there's similarities, and BCBAs will be like, no, it has nothing in common. There's nothing. And that's not true. There's kernels of truth in what they're saying, and we need to examine it and not do the thing. We all know at this point, I hope, that conversion therapy is obviously wrong and no one should do it.
Right.
But we shouldn't do any analog version of that anywhere else, if that makes sense,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And there were also concerns raised about just how the treatment group went through 40 plus hours of the rather rigid, DTT based ABA for between the ages of 2 and 6 in order to get these outcomes. So when you think about the IQ stuff, and there's a lot of just focus on those academics and not really on those functional skills that may be more socially valid to the child themselves. So we have to think about that. The other thing that often doesn't come up, I remember when I was working early intervention for a little bit of time, and one of the training packets had this Lovaas article in it because of how seminal it is.
Right.
And I thought it was really interesting how there wasn't really anything spoken about how the children in the treatment group were hit and how that was something that came up as well. So we have to think about that in terms of the results, and in terms of just maybe some of the psychological harms that may be kind of whitewashed and not really spoken about as well.
Yeah. And, I know in your article, too, you talk about that. Is it Catherine Maurice? Let me hear.
Yes.
I'm going to say it wrong.
Let me hear your voice.
Yes. Okay. So when I started working at said ABA center, it was my second year as a speech language pathologist. And I read that book. It was recommended that I read that book. And I really was like, wow. The one thing, I call that my ABA boot camp, because it was the first time that I was ever in a non-public program. And I was working with, and you know how it goes, you're not working with a 2-year-old. You're working with kids who are 8, 9, 10, 18, 20, 21, have no way to communicate besides using very unsafe problem behavior. And I do remember thinking wow, I really wanted to learn so much about ABA because it really did allow those kids to learn. I remember looking back at one of the kids who was 18 that we got from a Cleveland public school and thinking, what did they do with it? He was in specialized services, and he didn't learn to communicate till he was 18. It's no wonder, because I think both of you maybe said you worked with adults or in residential. And you think oh, well, wow, these are the forgotten students that nobody could reach them, right? Because maybe they were in a small district, or maybe the staff doesn't have the capacity to teach them. But the field has changed so much and is so much more compassionate than, I've been certified 12 years. So, I see some of those things that you're talking about, and just thinking about with early intervention, now I've been doing a lot of reading on NDBI. I'm reading that whole book, it's a college textbook. I'm reading it and sharing about it on my platform. But it makes so much sense. But I think what it is that there's still probably a lot of practitioners. I mean, that's why it's good for you to say conversion therapy, like don't do it, because people just don't talk about these things. And I think there are a lot of people that are really practicing in a way that's really antiquated. So,
and I think it's important too that like black and white thinking doesn't work in ethics very well. Like there's some things you never do, right? Like we're not going to slap people in the face in this day and age ever, do thigh slaps or any version of physical punishment during the acquisition programs. But it's not, at least I feel, Joe, if you feel differently, mention it, that we should never, ever, ever target behavior that might make someone fit in a little bit. Because I've had clients, especially adults, where like they can't get a date because their social skills are not there. And they'll like go up to a woman in a bar like this close and be like, do you want to go? And I'm like, you're terrifying people. Like, let's practice this, right? So like, and that's sort of helping them mask, but like upon their request so that they can access the world more and like have a family and do the things they want to do. So it's not like never, ever, ever help someone on the spectrum fit in better, especially if they're asking you to do it.
Right. Yeah.
But the main goal shouldn't be make sure they blend in and look normal, right? Like, so it's got to be a balance.
Right. Yes. So, I mean, the balance for me is I think back in terms of just some of the things that I've worked with, and it really comes back for me to the concept of your freedom ends at my nose. So I've had clients try and pull me off of a couch when I'm doing something else in order to try and get me to write something on their board about when they'll be seeing their parents again. And it's like, well, this person has other means of communication that they can use. Right. And it's just, I don't care that it's not speech. Personally, it's just, if it's communicative, then it's communicative, as long as you're not violating the rights of other people. So grabbing somebody and trying to pull them up is violating the rights of other people. So yeah, there is a bit of that balance because ultimately at the end of the day, we live in a society with a lot of different people and we're all accountable to other people. So that person's freedom ends at my nose, my freedom ends at theirs.
Right. Yeah, awesome. I like that. And, I try to have autistic adults on the show, and we have had people, late diagnosed and, having people on who, or maybe it's an autism mom who has a child who's maybe has more, complex communication needs. And things like that. But I do think it's good to talk about those. I'm glad you mentioned the social skills thing, because that, that's something that, I was on this podcast like 2 years ago with these people that have like 1 million TikTok followers now. And, the one thing they were saying is like, oh, well, there's this whole camp of people who think that like you shouldn't even provide early intervention. And
right.
And I just feel like, gosh, I just feel like with so much pseudoscience that's happening in the SLP world right now, I just feel like, and so many people just getting on the bandwagon, right? And like preaching this hope message that really doesn't have any science behind it. I just feel like, me as a scientific thinker, I'm thinking like, gosh, I think in 5 years when that kid is not able to use the restroom by themselves, is not able to make a snack by themselves, can't ride public transportation, because I've worked middle school, high school for a long time. I just feel like I don't know if these people understand when they're talking about all the pseudoscience that they really ethically, they are going against our ethical code. I'm just talking from a speech therapy standpoint because I feel like it's pretty rampant in the SLP field. And I just feel like, how can you just be so nonchalant about just spreading a message that really doesn't have any research? And I think, now, I did have a speech therapist on who's also a BCBA who talked about taking a really robust research course, but I don't remember that in my coursework as a speech therapist. When I do remember and was traumatized by my research design course as a BCBA. And I think sometimes people that are treating people in the field don't understand the difference between like what is really a robust research design, because they'll say it's research, but it's like, I think that's just like a paper that somebody wrote that's like narrative, and there's a big difference, right?
Yeah, I think it's that black and white thinking and jumping on a bandwagon of like all ABA is abuse. So if it's ABA, it's inherently bad. And that's obviously not true, right? And again, like I've had adult clients ask me to help them fit in a little bit better in certain circumstances because it was like badly impacting their life. And I don't see issue with that. I think it would be cruel to not help them when they're asking for help for something very reasonable. So yeah, it's just very a bandwagon right now to just ABA is evil no matter what. And then behavior analysts are like, we're amazing no matter what. And like, neither is true, right? It's in the middle.
Right.
Yeah.
Case by case.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we also have to think about the grayness in terms of just what knowledge means, and thinking about research in general. And so it goes back to thinking about just different kinds of lenses of research and who gets to determine what is researched as well, and thinking about things. And thinking about different kinds of methods that are used, whether they're quantitative, whether they're qualitative, whether you're using a post-positivistic lens or even a constructivist lens.
Yeah.
Just thinking about just how knowledge can be generated, and thinking about just the grayness there, and being able to critique and being able to evaluate things just critically in general, and really being able to look at each of those different paradigms and evaluate in that sense.
Yeah, I think John and I both deeply love the science of behavior analysis, and we want it to help people and people to be able to access it. And we're pretty invested, but it's out of love. We're not like, we're both behavior analysts. Like, we love it. We don't want to criticize the field, just to say it's like bad. We want to improve it for people and for the stakeholders. So.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I feel like that's conveyed in the article. So what recommendations do you have for students, parents, practitioners, if they would like to learn more kind of about the history of the field, how we can go forward? I like this from the article. You said, go forward with empathy and cultural humility. So any recommendations? I'm obviously read this article. We'll put it in the show notes. But what do you think? I loved your idea about a journal club. We kind of do that. I have a membership called the ABA Speech Connection. And so now we're doing a journal article every month where people get CEUs for like reading it and then also discussing it. So like we're talking about our next month is like happiness, indicators of happiness in therapy. Yeah. So, but you think like just kind of staying on top of the research, is that the best way to kind of stay in touch with what's out there?
I think it's a good way. And when I teach ethics, which I'm teaching this semester, and it's one of my favorite things to teach, but also research methods, because I love graphs. But anyway,
okay,
I know, but like they get excited. I'm like, and look at this in this line. It's so cool. And you could turn it on and turn it off. I'll just stop with that. But I tell my students like to basically pretend you're an alien from Mars and that literally everything is foreign to you, and look at it with entirely fresh eyes and evaluate it from there. Right. So like, this makes me uncomfortable because it's strange to me, but is there anything wrong with it? Right. So really just trying to have, and it's very, very hard to have truly like no value judgments about things. It's almost impossible, but to like get as close to pretending you're like an alien from another planet as possible, so that you can really look at things and see if it's impacting someone badly, or if it just looks strange, but they're happy as a clam. And if it's the second, leave them alone, right? Like, I'm a weird person. I've been weird my whole life, and people have mostly left me alone, and I'm very happy because I think it's worked out okay. But yeah, I think it's just being able to have that lens where you're just outside of the situation, sort of, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I love that. Wonderful.
Yeah. And for me, it's always listening to autistic people, and really developing the understanding that autistic culture exists, and really having that understanding as well. So when it comes to looking for autistic voices, yes, you can look to Temple Grandin, but look beyond Temple Grandin as well, to like the Lydia Browns, the Julia Bascoms, and the Ari Naemans. Also, really try to look for things from autistic women, autistic non-binary people, and autistic people of color, because those voices are really still underrepresented. And when it comes to just goals, really stepping back and making sure that those goals are truly functional, and we're working on them because they are functional and will help the person survive in the world, rather than just being for the comfort of others. So really watching for goals that may promote masking as well.
Yeah, really good points. I keep an eye on like the Facebook groups, and I read a bunch of memoirs by autistic people when I started working in autism a little bit, because it's never been my main field. But yeah, definitely like learning a lot about it, right? And trying to like understand the perspective is huge. I thought it went without saying, but I'm glad you said it because it may not necessarily go without saying.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for taking time. I will put the article in the show notes, and it was great to meet both of you.
You too. And if
You too. Thank you so
come
much.
down to FABA, just
Yes.
we'll catch up.
Yes.
We're going to be at ABA in May. We're doing a workshop on ethical pink flags. So
Wonderful.
yeah.
Yes. I'll keep you posted. ABA
right.
speech is hitting the road.
All right.
Thanks for listening to Autism Outreach. If you enjoyed the show today, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode full of actionable strategies you can use in your therapy room. Write a review too. That would mean so much to me. I always love hearing from you. Have a specific topic that you want included on a future show? Reach out over on Instagram, ABA Speech by Rose, or visit me at www.abaspeech.org.